Well, I'm a husband and a father, and I am one of 9 children. Big family. And what I do for a living is I teach students how to learn, and I teach faculty how to teach at the university, at specifically Princeton University. Um, and so what I'm interested in is how to help people really thrive. And the people I'm working with primarily are students, but I also study motivation, as you know. And in particular, I focus in on this topic of procrastination that everyone has experienced. And most of us have found a little perplexing, kind of confusing, like what's going on here,
Oh yeah.
and try to get over it. And so my mission in life is to reduce reduce that confusion, reduce that suffering, and help people thrive. And so I do that by helping people learn in school better, and I do that by helping people understand their own motivations and understand procrastination better. And I've been lucky enough to have some great mentors, including Professor Marty Covington at UC Berkeley, where I did my graduate studies, who was a renowned researcher in what's called self-worth theory of motivation. And I'm pretty sure those will be the themes that we talk about today.
Yes, yes, yes. That's why I asked you to come on here, Nick, because the way that you described procrastination was not a typical way of explaining it. So if you can enlighten us on that interview on TED Talk, it was amazing, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really lucky to get a chance to do that TED Talk. Actually, some students approached me and had been to a workshop that I'd done on procrastination and said, could you do this to a wider audience? From my point of view, procrastination is fundamentally about avoidance. So we're trying to, even though we want to do something, right? We have this, I want to do this thing, or I need to do it, or I need to study this class or complete this activity because it's going to help me in my career, or I need to do it to pay the bills or what have you. And so we have a motivation to do it, but we find ourselves kind of stuck, or we find that we're reluctant, or we have some resistance, and that feels kind of confusing. So in the end, what we're doing is we're avoiding that activity. But more than that, at some level, and sometimes we can say it's obvious, like, well, I just don't like doing my taxes, so I'm avoiding it. But some things we're avoiding that we actually like, and that we think are important and valuable. And then that gets kind of weird, kind of strange, like kind of actually like what I'm studying, but I can't get myself to do it. So the point of view of self-worth theory is that we're avoiding the meaning of the outcomes or the results of our work. So in particular, procrastination is a way to protect ourselves. It's a protection device or a protection strategy, because when we work hard at something, we really invest our effort. If we don't succeed at that thing, then it can really feel like, wow, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm inadequate. And so I'm not protected from that. Whereas if I procrastinate, I put it off, I work at the last minute. If I succeed on that activity, whether it be a test, or I write a report, or I turn that thing in, and it turns out that that's successful, then I can think, hey, I'm smart. I even did it at the last minute.
Yeah.
But here's the key point. If I'm not successful, if it's a bad result, if it's not to my standards, I can say, well, I didn't have very much time. I didn't put much effort into it. And that's the explanation. And the explanation is not my ability, right? It's not my capability. It's that I didn't have time. And all of us have a need to protect our sense of ourselves and our sense of our capability. And so we are kind of incentivized, we're motivated to procrastinate. And so we might not think of it that way, but we're actually motivated to procrastinate.
Yes. Yes, that was a great point. I also wanted to talk to you and get your opinion. Do you think this procrastination leads to other problems like self-esteem, the way we receive ourselves and others? Do you think they start to connect eventually in the end?
What do you mean by connect? Say some more about that.
So when you procrastinate and you don't get something done, and then the end result is what it should be, which is seemingly a failure. You feel like failure, and then after you do it so much, you begin to believe this is who you are. This is what happens. And at least personally, when I procrastinate, those are the effects that happens to me.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, did any of those other students or have you speak on something of that?
Right. So one of the ways I understand what you're saying is kind of the cumulative effect of this cycle that might happen repeatedly. And then, so one time we do it and we might say, well, I just put it off and, it's fine. But if I do that enough times, then I begin to internalize that. And I say, for instance, I am a procrastinator, even though most of the things we do, we don't actually procrastinate, it's just on these few things, but then we begin to identify with that. Yeah. Or we feel that, if enough of these things happen, we can say, well, I'm not good at that thing, whatever that thing is. Or I think even maybe more subtly is we just, after a while, we begin not to trust ourselves. So we might say, I'm going to make a schedule, or I'm going to make a plan, or I'm going to tell somebody, but in the back of our minds, we're kind of thinking, am I really going to do that? Because we've kind of lost this sense of confidence that we'll follow through, right? We can't control the results. We can't control how something's going to be evaluated. All we can do is seek mastery of our own decision-making and our own actions and intentions. But even then, that can get kind of uncertain, right? You just, because the past taught you, I don't always follow through. So I don't know if that's relating to what you're getting at. And so it can, but I think, and then it can get to our sense of ourselves, a deep sense of ourselves. And so it's not just affecting one little part of our lives or one task, because it's coming back to how do we see ourselves? How do other people see us? And then other people can start to react to us. Oh, you always put things off. You always leave it to the last minute. You're a crammer. And so we can get these messages from other people as well. And I think that can internalize. And, one of the big ideas of what's this called self-worth theory is that our society is sending us these messages that your worth is equivalent to your work, right? Kind of your worth as a person is equivalent to what your performances are. Do you make this many sales? Do you get this kind of rating? Do you get this kind of grade? And then we think, well, that performance is really a result of my innate ability, this thing that's unchanging. And so that's why I think it goes so deep, because many of us carry around this idea that, well, if I'm good at math or I'm not. It's not about, do I study in a certain way? Do I use resources? Do I engage with the teacher? Am I really focused and attentive? All these things that could affect my performance. We just sort of assume I'm good at that, or I'm a good writer, or I'm not a good writer. Yeah. Things like that. And so, but notice it's I am, right? I am, or I am not. So I think this is what you're getting at. It gets really down to our core sense of self. Yeah. Is procrastination a positive? Is it a negative? I would just say it just is. Yeah. So procrastination is very human. Yeah. So is having a nose a positive or negative? Well, it is when you're smelling something good, but when you're getting punched, it's not. It just is. Human beings are procrastinate because we have mixed motivations. That's just part of being in the world. So what's important about saying that is most of us have negative judgments about procrastination. We say procrastination is bad. If I do it, I'm bad, and I shouldn't do it. And when I do, I feel guilty and I feel ashamed. The issue with that is guilt and shame actually make it harder to overcome procrastination and do the thing we want to do. The reality is, and this isn't just positive thinking or I'm trying to put a spin on it. The reality is most people procrastinate. That is the definition of normal. Yes. Most people do it. So it is normal to procrastinate. Fully understandable. We understand why people procrastinate. Well, we're going to explore that here. That doesn't mean that we like it or we like the consequences of it, right? Right. You know what I mean? It's fully human to get sick. That doesn't mean we want to get sick. Yeah. But we don't. But we want to understand that's part of being a human being. Something's, that's going to happen. We want to prevent it. We want to minimize it. We want to stay healthy. Same thing with procrastination. It's just normal. It's just a part of life. So human beings are procrastinate because we have mixed motivations. That's just part of being in the world. So what's important about saying that is most of us have negative judgments about procrastination. We say procrastination is bad. If I do it, I'm bad, and I shouldn't do it. And when I do, I feel guilty and I feel ashamed. The issue with that is guilt and shame actually make it harder to overcome procrastination and do the thing we want to do. The reality is, and this isn't just positive thinking or I'm trying to put a spin on it. The reality is most people procrastinate. That is the definition of normal.
Yes.
Most people do it.
Most people
so
do
it is normal to procrastinate. Fully understandable. We understand why people procrastinate. Well, we're going to explore that here. That doesn't mean that we like it or we like the consequences of it, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's fully human to get sick. That doesn't mean we want to get sick.
Yeah.
But we don't. But we want to understand that's part of being a human being. Something's, that's going to happen. We want to prevent it. We want to minimize it. We want to stay healthy. Same thing with procrastination. It's just normal. It's just a part of life. But that's why that's important, because if we go down the angle of judgment when we're judging ourselves, then that tends not to be positive. If we take a different angle and we say, most people procrastinate. Why is that? Instead of being self-judgmental, we can be self-curious. And that's the road then to say, self-knowledge. Oh, I see why I'm procrastinating, because I'm feeling this and that. And again, that's fully human. That's just part of being a human being. But then I can accept myself. Oh, sometimes I procrastinate, sometimes I don't. I want to learn how to procrastinate less because I don't like the effects, not because it's so bad. I just don't like that result. But the stakes go way down, right? We're not judging, I'm lazy. Oh, I shouldn't do that. Get that out the window and just be curious and try to understand and then try to resolve it. But that is not how most of us have been socialized. That is not how the messages we've learned from our society, often from our families, and definitely from school, right? So maybe this is getting closer than what you're asking this last question, which is what's the connection here? Are you wondering, like, how do people get this belief or this understanding?
Yes, definitely. That's what I'm trying to ask. Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. So where does it, if it's so common, and where does it come from? Well, I think, the research shows there's a few ways that we get some messages. So one way is that and I focus on education, but it's not only education. It could be, I was really into sports, and you'd see the same thing. Well, that person's a natural whatever athlete. Well, that person is valued more than the person who works hard and does the technique and shows up and does the practice and is good. Somehow in our society, we like the people more. We value the people more who are just good at it naturally. In some ways, that's kind of counterintuitive, because we also value people that work hard.
Yeah.
Right. But it's pretty clear we like the natural. So one thing is we get messages that it's better to just be good at something. Well, if I work at something and I try and I prepare, then I'm kind of every time I do that, I'm proving I'm not a natural. And then if I'm not a natural genius or brilliant or athlete or dancer or whatever, or musician, and then I actually try really hard and then I fail, that's pretty low in our society, right? Because it's the opposite. That's saying you're not only are you naturally gifted, but you're inadequate. You're the opposite of that. And so that's low in our society. But it happens in school. One way I use a little kind of scenario to explain this to people is, I'm an educator, so I feel okay to critique I think educators get critiqued more than they should, but I am one, and I'm going to do this a little bit. So forgive me, all the teachers out there. We've all done this, and parents do it too. Is we valorize, we validate, and we recognize the students that get good grades, as we should. And then we say some things like, but then that kind of slips into, well, they're good students. Well, are they good students just because you got good grades? Really? Is that what makes a good student? I thought it was like that you're curious and you're interested and you help other people learn and you study hard and you try your best. But the grade doesn't necessarily capture that. Do you see what I mean? So we begin to kind of mix up or conflate these two things of getting good grades to being a good student. We hear it all the time.
Yeah.
In people's language. And then we somehow, it's kind of like, it's even the good kid that gets a good grade becomes a good student, just sort of becomes good. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
That the good student is good. They're just good. Well, I'm gonna tell you, I was a pretty good student, but I wasn't always good, for sure.
Right.
But the point is that even in our everyday language, it gets mixed together. Other ways that I think we begin to associate our worth with our performance and our achievement in what we do rather than who we are is, as a parent, and I've done this, and many parents have, is, we praise our kids for when they do things right and do things well. And it can feel like a child that our love for them, our valuing of them is attached to what they do rather than just who they are.
Yes.
So when it gets connected that way, then, well, I want to do things to please my parents. We've all seen people like that. They want to please their parents, and then that becomes pleasing the teacher, and that becomes pleasing the your boss and pleasing their partner. And again, particularly when we're kids, that's actually pretty useful. We want our kids to do that, but it can then we then associate our worth not as endowed in us or solid or absolute or unconditional, but as connected to our performance, right? What we do in school. Mom and dad will only love me if I get certain grades. Of course, the parents don't feel that, but the kids can interpret that. Yes. And there's subtle ways that the way we talk can reinforce that inadvertently. So it can come through schools, which is a big influence on children, of course. It can come through families. But in our society, there's all kinds of messages out there on media and music and films and TV saying, right, that reinforces this.
Now, Nick, what are some tools we can use that will help us kind of counteract with this type of thinking and functioning?
Right. We as individuals, especially as adults, right? First of all, we can know that, hey, I may have internalized a belief about my worth and that I actually don't agree with. So if you really ask people and you say, who are the people you care about? Who are the people you love? What is it that you value about them? Their bank account or their GPA? No. But we often think about that way to ourselves, right? Number one. So we kind of apply different standards. So one is to be a kind friend to ourselves, just as we'd be a kind friend to someone else, and look at ourselves through that angle, through that lens. If a friend of yours was struggling and procrastinating on some task, I think you would go in there and say, okay, look, how can we help? How can I help you? What is it? Let's break it down. How can I be support? What's a resource you could use? Who else could help you? Have you done this before? You have done this before. You can do it again. So we try to pump them up. Well, often the way we're talking to ourselves is, oh, you should be able to do this. And why aren't you doing this? Or we try to scare ourselves into doing it. If you don't do this bad thing's going to happen. But we would never do that to a friend. So to kind of recap, one is to recognize, number one, that we know that people have value and significance and worth that is not connected to their achievement or their performance in this external world. It's their kindness, it's their generosity, it's their sense of humor, it's them showing up for us. It's just their desire to be helpful. And for people who are religious, often the value, the human worth, they're endowed by their creator. It's not what they do in the world, and it's certainly not about their bank account, right? Or because I work with students or their GPA. And then to say, okay, but I have internalized that. I'm going to question it. I'm going to be aware when I'm thinking in that way. And then, so what's a tool that I can use? Oh, I can think of myself as a friend. Because we have this relationship to ourselves, right? It's a weird kind of thing. We're us, but we have this relationship to ourselves. Do we judge ourselves or do we accept ourselves? Do we criticize ourselves or do we help ourselves? I think if we think of ourselves from the vantage point of friend, we're more likely to be not judged, not criticized, to be helpful, right? And to accept, because that's what we do with our friends, more than likely. Some other things are to recognize that it's not uncommon. It's actually it's more common to have kind of mixed motivations about things. So it's about understanding human motivation. So one is to say, if I'm feeling a little bit of reluctance or resistance, I really don't want to do this thing. Does that mean I don't really, really want to do it? No, everybody has mixed motivations. That's okay. So don't interpret that or too much or put too much stock in that. And again, just recognize you don't have to have pure motivations. That's too high a standard. We don't need that. That doesn't help us. So that's another big idea is if I feel mixed motivations, I can say, okay, why is that? So it's the strategy is kind of self-inquiry. What's going on for me? Self-knowledge. Hey, I notice these patterns. In this moment, I'm feeling resistance. I'm kind of agitated and I feel a little dread in my gut. And I don't want to do this thing, even though I know it's beneficial to me, my family, my community. So some things are another one is just simply to pause and know, those emotions of discomfort, they will pass. Emotions don't last very long. They go through our body. So if I can wait and instead of getting on my phone, right, or getting out of the chair and going downstairs to the fridge to avoid that thing, if I can just pause and say, okay, I can do this. It's going to pass through. Take a breath and then try to use my mental faculties, my thinking. Right. So emotions are important. We don't want to ignore them. Yeah. So again, this is a strategy. So I would call it emotional self-regulation. We want to notice our emotions. We want to see these are information. Hey, I'm feeling some anxiety about this. I'm feeling some dread. Part of me doesn't want to do that. Okay. Yeah. Why is that? Maybe that's worth thinking about. Then another part of me really wants to do it. What's that part of me? So another strategy then, so I'm giving you kind of a series. One is kind of self-talk. Another is emotions. Another is another technique that I call motivational stacking is to be real and say, okay, these are these negative reasons I don't want to, this is I don't want to do it. And in the moment they can overwhelm us. And then we go, well, I guess I don't really want to do it. But if you pause, like I just said, you take that pause and you say, okay, now what are all the reasons that I would want to do this? And not invent or pretend or make them up, but really. So for instance, I'm working with students a lot. So I'll say, okay, why did you sign up for this class back at the beginning of the semester when you're idealistic and you chose it? Why this class? Oh, well, it's a requirement. Oh yeah, but you could have chosen other ones. Why this one? And then they notice they remember what was interesting to them about this particular class or what appealed to them. What knowledge, what skills they could develop. Yes. And then they say, oh, well, I'm taking it because it's part of this major. Oh, so has another use. It's not only the knowledge and skills and interests, but it's useful. It's a step toward your degree. Well, why do you want to have that degree? Well, because if I have that degree, then I can be an engineer or whatever. That's a steady job and I can make things that help society and I can uplift my family, my community, because I'll be making good money. Those are powerful motives. So that's another reason you chose it. So then I ask, so are you thinking of all these positive reasons when you sit in your chair and open up your laptop or your textbook? Are you thinking of those reasons? And they'll say, well, no. Well, if you're not thinking of them, they can't affect you. That's the nature of motivation. If it's not in your mind, then what is it? Where is it? It's nowhere. So it's not about pretending or inventing motivations. It's really about tapping into motivations, reminding ourselves of these reasons. So when I work with people, I'm not saying, think of all the possible reasons. No, I'm saying, what are your real reasons? And then the trick, it's not even a trick. The action is to turn that reason in the moment into a motivation, and then that motivation into an intention. I'm going to do this activity because it helps me get my degree, which is going to help me serve my family and be a good member of my community and uplift. And it's interesting and I like the skill and I do want to be an engineer. I do want to be a nurse or whatever it is. Well, I want to help people or I love the human body. It's fascinating. Maybe not at midnight on a Thursday night, but okay, it is. But I remind myself, right. Okay. And then what happens is it kind of tips the balance, right? The negative reasons remain. So I wouldn't say pretend they're not there. Don't pretend anything. we have to live in reality. But what happens is you stack up these positive motivations and they kind of overwhelm the negative, and then you tip the balance, and that helps us go forward. Because procrastination is being stuck.
Yes.
You can't move. So how do you move? You lift this power and you lower that one, right? Then you can go. So those are some techniques, some strategies that I teach people.
Well said, Nick. It would seem to me that this thought process that you've engaged in, it has to leak outside the classroom. Is this how you raise your children to think? Is this how your wife thinks? Is this how your community surrounding you thinks? Because it's amazing in thought.
Well, I try. You know, I'm a fallible parent and spouse like anybody else. And you know, I think the main thing is to bring it into my life. And so I'm, for having learned this you know, motivation research and theory, and then having worked with students, mostly students, not only, but mostly students for 20 years now, you know, I'm motivated by I'm inspired by their courage and their work to do it. So I'm more sensitive to that. So I'll notice, it just happened today. Wow, I'm feeling some tension, some kind of anxiety in my gut. I wonder where that's coming from. So what are the tasks I have? Or, hey, I got this thing, and also I notice, I'm feeling some reluctance or some resistance. Where's that coming from? Let me pause. Maybe I don't even know where it's coming from, but part of it doesn't matter. Just let it go, and then take a minute. So why am I doing this? Remind myself. There's other things too that are much simpler, like, okay, I like coffee. Let me go make a cup of coffee, and that'll make me enjoy this task more, because I'll just combine the coffee with the task. So I think, you know, the things with my, you know, like, I kind of like that my daughter sort of ignores me, because that means she's free. She's got her own mind, but sometimes it's very frustrating.
Yes.
But so on that point, because I know you're talking to parents, this is one of your objectives, is to talk to parents and kids. I think it's to have this balance of, I don't think it's very useful usually to tell people what to do. Even after about 3 or 4, I couldn't make her do anything. I mean, so I can help her rethink things. I can support her. I can encourage her. So one of the things I try to do is simply remind her of these positive reasons for doing things. That's the main thing. Like, okay, let's talk about why you want to do this. What's the positive reasons for that? I don't even have to talk about the negatives. So mostly it's about that. I think, you know, sometimes trying to demonstrate some of the skills, and like even say it out loud, like, oh yeah, I really didn't want to do that, and here's what I did. And then they can hear, oh yeah, your dad's struggling too. And here's this thing you learned how to do. So I think it's, in my opinion, and maybe that's because I would have not listened very much to direct advice, is to kind of do it pretty subtly, you know, kind of on the down low a little bit, you know, and try to incorporate it in your life, right? Kids see what we do in some way or another. They take that in. Maybe they're not going to act on it right now, but I've become much more like my parents and my dad. The older I get. So I guess another thing, then take the long view, right? As best we can, take the long view, meaning maybe they don't do it right now. Maybe they don't do it today or next week, but at some place it got in there.
Oh yeah, I believe that. Nick, I want to mention your book, Life Beyond Grades.
Oh, thank you.
Last time we didn't mention it, and I happened to just go through again, and I said, hey, he has a book. Tell us about that book, Life Beyond Grades.
Well, you underscored the title, right? So the idea is sometimes when kids are in school, and especially the kind of places I work, kids are very, very serious about their academics. And they're high achievers. That's why they got to Princeton, and I was at UC Berkeley before, another school for very high achieving students. I wouldn't have gotten into either one of them myself as a student. And it feels like to them that their life is grades on the one hand, right? That the stakes feel really high because of the reasons we've talked about. They feel like their parents are expecting them to get A's. their identity to other people is, well, they're the math genius or the writing science whiz or the best writer out of their high school. So that's who they are. That's who they think of themselves. So that means every time you write a paper or every time you take a math test, if you're the math genius, then you got to perform every single time. And if you don't, you're not who you think you are, who other people think you are. So the stakes aren't just points in a class, it's self-concept.
Yes.
So that's why we chose that title, Life Beyond Grades, meaning, is there life beyond grades? Can we help students get beyond just to focus on grades? Because while it's practical, students need to think about grades. A single-minded focus on grades, just the result and not the process, not our intrinsic reasons for doing something, actually lowers our performance overall, right? If we can be tapped into our desire to these other kinds of motivations. So Life Beyond Grades is bringing the same theory, the same research-based theory that I've been talking about to explain procrastination, and say, okay, that way of thinking about motivation, what moves people, what leads them to act, if we brought that way of thinking to teaching and designing classes and grading and making assignments, how would that help students get more engaged? How would that help them be less fearful of bad grades, therefore more focused on truly learning valuable knowledge and skills, as well as getting good grades? One of the ways we reduce kids' worries about grades is we show them how to get good grades.
Yes.
We don't pretend like they don't matter. That's just what most teachers say. Don't worry about the grades, just focus on, no. We want to say, here's how to get a good grade. The best way to get a good grade is to learn the most.
Yes.
That's where teacher and students' interests come together. Kids, of course, want to get good grades, and I want to give them. And I want students to learn the most. So the best way to get a good grade is to design a class where the best way to get a good grade is to learn the most.
Yes.
And so that's being really clear, explicit, and it's also actually helping students tap into their own motivations.
Yeah.
And incorporating some of the activities that I've described into a class.
As you guys mentioned, as I read about the book, I think thought processes like this would bring back the love of education, because none of us love it anymore for whatever reason. So this is truly inspiring. I also want to know, is there any other books coming, any other TED Talks, or any other things coming for you?
That's I really appreciate that question. So first thing I'll say that in my mentor and my co-author of that book, Life Beyond Grades, Marty Covington, I think I mentioned his name already. He's the researcher at Berkeley. So that was his 9th book. So he's written a lot. And there's one called Making the Grade that it's kind of technical. But if there's somebody out there who really wants to understand self-worth motivation, it's pretty popular, and you'd probably be able to find it at a library. But I'm working on an online course for overcoming procrastination, and it's aimed at professionals and at students. And so the TED Talk's just 20 minutes, and I can introduce some things and give some strategies and techniques, but I can't really equip people who are struggling. So in that TED Talk, you'll remember that I identified my life mission as reducing people's suffering. That's my life goal. So the course is really targeting those people who've really struggled with procrastination. They've tried to overcome it and they haven't been able to, or they do for a little while, then it comes back, or they start to do it again, or they've had really negative consequences. And they're really asking these questions like, why am I doing this? And how come I'm doing it again? Even I told myself I don't want to do it. And I think I really don't want to do it, but I can't. And so that's really kind of puzzling, right? It's confusing.
Yes.
It's a weird thing. So that we can't understand our own behavior. So what I'm trying to do in this course is really identify those people. So there's a bunch of stuff out there on the internet. If you want to be entertained and laugh about procrastination, great. You can go watch these talks. But to do the work to change your life and change the outcomes, that's going to take a while. And that's going to take some strategies that we talked about and walking people through things. And I've created surveys and like questionnaires that tell people back about the motivational profile. And so the course that I'm working on is kind of pulling together 20 years of me working in this field and the best strategies and techniques that I can share with people so they can, make change in their life. And really the goal is to be able to learn when we're stuck, to tip the balance of motivation from avoidance to approach, to interrupt that, what I call the protective avoidance cycle. We're avoiding work to protect ourselves. How do we create a positive cycle where it's productive engagement in action? How do we do that? That's the goal. And there's a lot of techniques and tools. And so the course is meant to be really practical too. So on the one hand, it's based in this research and this theory and these big ideas, but it's very practical. So the students leave, the plan is that for the students who are people who take the class to leave with a toolkit that's very individualized. So we find out, well, what motivates you? Why? How? What's the way you talk to yourself? How could you change that? What kind of resources or relationships are productive and helpful for you? How do we maximize those? So there's ways that the course is organized where it starts with people understanding themselves, and then they turn that into knowledge. They make it explicit, they get it out, and then they use that to make personalized, individualized tools and techniques for themselves. And so I'm working on that. I've done a little workshop, I've done workshops or maybe like an hour, hour and a half, and I've done a lot of coaching that might be hours and hours and hours, but I've never quite put that intensity into a course. So that's the new part for me.
Nick, you think that you will go even outside of the classroom? Like even me reaching out to you is because I'm a person that suffers from this procrastination. I have not made it, you guys. It is an ongoing issue I deal with now.
Me too.
So, but I'm not at Princeton U. So have you thought about making a way to where a person like me or the next could get involved?
Well, actually, that's right. I wasn't very clear. Yeah, so this course will be online, open to anybody. And it'll have a thread specifically for working for adults, right? But it's not just for students. So it uses some of the examples, a lot of examples from school, because everybody's been to school. So you know what that's like, but it's really meant to then help us understand the dynamics of motivation, but very similar motivational dynamics are happening in our lives outside of school. So there'll be a focus on kind of students, because I think that's what I know the most, and that's students, people who need some help, but also working adults. So there'll be like two tracks, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
One for students, one for working adults. And I'm working with a friend of mine, and we've been working for years on this, and he has I know the content, and he has the skills to do the video and the editing. He's got computer skills that I don't have. So we hope to have that done before the end of this year, actually. I just did the first shooting of the videos yesterday, as a matter of fact. I was a little nervous, so we've got to work on that. So that's one way we want to get the word out to more people. And
well, let us know here at Arms, Nick, so we can pass that word along, and me myself even take part in this. This is important. I got just maybe one or two more questions before we end this session. I'd like to know, Nick, what motivates you?
Well, I feel really lucky in my field, my work life. What motivates me, I have this unique combination. So if I can tell you a little story. So I got into this field because I became a teacher, not really because I wanted to be a teacher. My first teaching job was in Japan. I taught English. And I will freely admit, I just wanted to travel. I wanted adventure. And that was the way to do it. So I was going to do it. And that's what I did. And I was an okay teacher. And then I came back to the United States, and I got a job teaching reading, which I really got to love reading when I was living abroad and traveling. I was just reading all the time. But it was an interesting teaching school, because one of the it wasn't like in a regular public school. It was an after school enrichment program. So it'd be like an hour and a half after school, 1 day a week, maybe 5, 6, 7 weeks. But the goal of the reading program was to teach kids to love to read. It wasn't about the skills. That wasn't the focus. It was to love to read, and actually brought parents into the classroom too, so we could have the parents not be teachers, because that's what we wanted to do, but to say, how do you read with your kid to make them love it? Because if they love it, they'll learn to do it, right? If you love something, you'll get good at it after a while.
Yes.
Anyway, so I was doing that, and I was kind of amazed at, in 5 or 6 or 7 weeks, the impact we were having on kids. And I was just blown away. I loved it, and I was just fired up. And then I was lucky enough, I became a trainer. I would train the new teachers, but I had never really had formal training in teaching reading at this point. So I basically said, so now I'm fascinated by reading. So this is the first kind of motivation: fascination, passion. How does it work? What happens when we read? What's going on in our heads? How come this way of teaching seems to be so effective? What about it? So now I had a question. I had this desire to know, this curiosity. So I had that. And so I applied to graduate school, and I went to UC Berkeley and studied reading. While I was there, I started working at what is still called the Student Learning Center. So Student Learning Center was working with college students at Berkeley. And our job was to help students thrive at school, to adapt to this really challenging environment, to learn to study better, to learn better, including reading, time management. And our explicit goal was to work with students who were first gen, low income, students of color. So it was very much a social equity charge. And that fired me up. So now I have so I would say that's my mission in life, combined with my passion. And they came together, right? I'm curious. I just want to know about reading and learning and how people do it. And the more I know about that, I can use that to serve this other motivation, this mission in life. How do we make education better for students? And a lot of that came from, I had a fine college education, but mainly I was just about getting grades and partying, but mostly about, I just okay, and that's fine, but it could have been so much more. And so my goal was to help people have that kind of education that they wanted, and to make sure they had the knowledge and the skills and the strategies that they could do it. And in particular, maybe students whose high schools didn't prepare them for a place like Princeton, right? They didn't have the extra tutoring and the SAT prep, and they didn't have all that. But when they got to Berkeley, they had all this potential and drive and desire. And so I wanted to help them as individuals, and I wanted to make the university more inclusive and more equitable and more diverse. And I wanted to make society more equitable and diverse. So these are very, you put those things together. I just felt very lucky. So those are the two things that motivate me. And so I think there's a big service part to that. And then, but just this very, very selfish, I'm curious, how does this work? And so I think those are the two big motivations. I'm not I'm motivated to achieve, but not a lot. I'm not trying to get rich or be the best. That's not a big motivator for me. I was when I was younger in sports, but that's not a huge motivator for me. I like to touch people. I like to be able to change, to help them change in the ways that they want. The thing that I like the most is when someone is empowered or equipped. So it's not just that they have the outcome, but they have internalized something that they carry with them forever. And when you see that happen, it's magical. It's kind of addictive.
Yes, it is.
What motivates you?
Well, seeing things differently, being unorthodox and thinking outside of the box. There's something that you put up a quote by Nelson Mandela that stood out to me. And I love this quote, Nick. It said, "May your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears." Yeah. I love Nelson Mandela. I've seen many quotes except
Yeah.
this one. So I want to thank you for sharing that as you shared it. And is there anything else you would like to say to the audience before we leave today?
Well, I think if I could just pick up that quote and why I picked that, there's just such deep wisdom. It's very simple, but it's such deep wisdom, right? So it doesn't say don't have fears, right? It doesn't say, oh, you shouldn't have fears. It says, despite having fears, right? Make choices that reflect those hopes, those things you're striving after, those things you're going for. And it's not just because, well, that's what you should do. In the end, we'll be glad we did. We'll be glad, and others will be glad. I've learned in my life the hard way. When I make choices that are based on my fear, and I have them, to protect myself or defend myself, or I kind of talk myself into not stretching. In the end, that doesn't serve me. It's human to protect yourself, but in the end, when I make choices to avoid something, then I'm not really focused on something positive, and that positive thing doesn't happen, because there's a big difference between trying to do something to avoid a negative consequence and going for that thing. And so, that he captured that so simply. And, so you reaching out to me and saying, hey, Nick, will you do this? Well, yeah, I don't know what that's going to be like. I could sound dumb, but in the end, my hope is to be helpful. And if I'm going to be helpful, if I'm going to realize that hope, I have to take that action. I need to meet with you. Yes. We need to talk. We got to do it. And I don't always do it. So that's the thought I would leave people with, is if we strive toward our positive ideals, good things will happen more often than if we simply try to avoid bad things.